can all see a presentation. You should be able to see it now.
Yes.
Are we ready? This is going to be what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about how citizens can finance the energy transition. And before we start, maybe a brief introduction. Can I go to the next slide? I hope I can. Yep, there we go. So my name is Daan. I am Belgian. I'm based in Ghent. And I'm very happy to hear that some of you enjoyed our wonderful city a few months ago or a few years ago. I don't know when exactly you came over.
Half a year.
Months ago. Wonderful. Well, now it's even more lovely. Now everything is sunny and green. So I think you should definitely come back. Anyhow, I'm Flemish and therefore I'm not a native speaker. I hope you can all understand my English. If not, then that's not an issue. Just let me know. I don't mind you asking questions while I'm presenting. That's not a problem at all. As Britt was explaining, I don't want this to be like a dull session. I really want this to be interactive. So don't mind asking, and you can ask while I'm doing my presentation or at the end. We will have about 5 sections, which I will be talking about today, 5 main topics. And I will always make sure that you have the room and the space to ask any questions after each of the sections. So, but if you flag an issue or if you flag a problem or if you don't understand anything, then don't wait until the end of the presentation. You can always get in touch afterwards. My contact details will be shared, of course, and you can always reach out to my colleagues in Rescoop EU. We're based in Belgium, Brussels, and Antwerp, but I will briefly introduce our organization later on. Presentation will be made available, as Britt mentioned, and any references that I will be making today will appear in an interactive toolbox. We are currently making a brand new website, which will hopefully be operational and published by, I think, somewhere autumn, hopefully September, October. It will include an interactive toolbox with all kinds of documents, reports, videos, which basically cover the story that I will bring in today's session. Of course, if you really want to use a specific report, you can always get in touch and I will be happy to refer you to the right documents. Okay, so that is for the introduction. Those are going to be the main points that I will be addressing. First of all, we're going to have a look at what cooperatives are, and I will give you a brief historic perspective on how the movement grew and what it means for energy communities and energy cooperatives in particular. Then we will look at the, let's say there's a whole variety of activities that cooperatives, energy cooperatives are engaging themselves in, and we will look at those activities and also the different business models that energy cooperatives can put in place to accelerate the energy transition. Thirdly, we will have a look at financing models and ownership models, because when you hear the word financing, the first thing you need to think about is who owns the actual project. That is quite an important issue in energy cooperatives, and therefore I will also spend some time on this in today's presentation. We will then look at return on investment and what that means in practice. Quite a short section, but then we will look at financing needs of energy cooperatives and how Rescoops, how energy cooperatives and Rescoop Europe has been able to address these needs by setting up a new legal entity. But I will briefly introduce you to that when we get to that part. And then at the end, I think quite an interesting section for you will be spent on collaborations between energy cooperatives and local authorities. Throughout the presentation, I will be referring to lots of examples from across Europe. I hope you will find them inspiring and interesting. I'm also using quite a lot of pictures. If you want to take some notes, that's totally fine. And once again, if you have any questions, don't mind interrupting me while I'm doing the presentation. All right. Everybody ready for the first part? Yeah. First part will be about cooperatives. And when we talk about cooperatives, the first thing that you need to know about cooperatives is what is mentioned in a definition. And when we use definitions, we always refer to a definition that was made by the International Cooperative Alliance. That is the mothership of cooperatives. I mean, that's what any cooperative should be referring to when they are talking about their business or their organization. And what the International Cooperative Alliance says about cooperatives is that it's people-centered enterprises that are owned, controlled, and run by and for their members to realize common economic, social, and or cultural needs and aspirations. That's quite a sentence, but the main thing you need to remember from that is that a cooperative is not set up to maximize profit. It's to maximize the actual value that members can take out of a cooperative. And that is an economic one, a social one, or a cultural one. So the main purpose for a cooperative is not to maximize profit, it's to serve the needs of its members. And that's the main purpose of a cooperative. It's people-centered. Cooperatives, they also bring together people in a democratic and equal way. Yeah. And that means that if the members are customers, employees, users, residents, they are always democratically controlled through the one member, one vote rule. And that means that regardless of the amount of shares that you own in a cooperative, you always get one equal vote at the AGM, at the general meeting. So there's equal voting rights regardless of the amount of shares that you own as a member. Yeah. So that is the main definition that we're always referring to when we talk about cooperatives, be it in the energy sector or cooperative supermarkets or cooperatives in general. I mean, there's a whole variety of cooperatives. They always refer to the same definition. A historic perspective, and I think if we go back in time, it's around in the 1840s, we had a great potato famine in Europe. Especially England suffered from this potato famine, and it caused, it actually made, it had a huge impact on the way we saw organization, because that is the first time we ever saw cooperative appearing. And this is a picture that was taken in 1841, yeah. And it was taken in Manchester in the UK, and it's officially the first cooperative. It's a bunch of weavers who were suffering from the Great Potato Famine, and they decided to team up in what we call a cooperative. It was called a society back then. I think it was called the Rochdale Pioneer Society, and it's known as the first cooperative in history. And so what these weavers did is they set up a new legal entity. They gave equal voting rights to each of the members, and they bought, it was actually a cooperative supermarket. So they bought products, they bought food on the market, and they sold it to the members at an affordable rate. And at the end of the year, the members got a dividend. So they got a return on investment based on the actual amount of products that they bought from the cooperative. So this is actually the first cooperative in history. It's 1841, and we're talking UK. We're talking about the UK in Rochdale, close to Manchester, so the greater Manchester region. A few years later, and we're taking a boat all the way to Ghent, a wonderful city that you visited already. During the 19th century, I think you all realized that we had this huge industrialization, which caused a whole lot of trouble for people who were employed in factories. Living conditions were very bad. People didn't have sufficient financial means. They were often hungry. There was a lot of violence. The industrialization of Europe has caused a whole lot of trouble. And that is also when we see the first cooperatives appearing on the mainland. This is actually, Vooruit is one of the biggest cooperatives that used to operate in the city of Ghent, the city where I live in. And the Vooruit didn't only have a cooperative supermarket where people could actually become a member and therefore purchase products at an affordable rate, so much cheaper, but they also set up a cooperative bank, a cooperative pharmacy, a cooperative concert hall. So everything was turned into cooperatives. And this is also when we founded socialism on the European mainland. So cooperatives and socialism have been quite interconnected ever since. Yeah? So this is actually a picture that comes from, again, from the cooperative. So one of the main things you need to know about cooperatives in general is that they always thrive and prosper when there's an economic depression. When things go bad, people find each other and they try to set up something collectively. They try to team up and find a solution to the problems that they're facing. And that's to say that same thing happens in the energy sector, but we will come to that later on. So, but this is basically one of the main historic events that happened for cooperatives. Cooperatives today, I think worldwide, and then I'm referring once again to the numbers of the International Cooperative Alliance, there's about 3 million cooperatives worldwide. That's quite a lot. Yeah, so 12% of the population worldwide is a member of a cooperative. I don't know how many people are a member of a cooperative who are participating today, but I think it should be around 12% at least. At least I'm a member of a cooperative, many cooperatives, and I hope some of you will also be a member of a cooperative, and if not, you should definitely consider joining one. Yeah, cooperatives also account for 10% of the jobs worldwide, so it's quite a big movement. And the turnover of the 300 largest cooperatives is 2,000 billion euro. That is more or less the GDP of a country like Italy. So, I mean, if you put these cooperatives together, we're talking about quite a size. So the size of the cooperative movement is pretty impressive. The way these cooperatives are organized is that internationally, they are represented by the International Cooperative Alliance. And in Europe, we have a European branch, which is called Cooperatives Europe. And in Cooperatives Europe, they have a sector federation for energy, for supermarkets, for consumers, for pharmacies, and of course the sector federation at the EU, at the European level. So we, Rescoop EU, officially the sector federation of Cooperatives Europe, and this is how we are embedded in this international network. So internationally, you have the ICA, Europe, at the European level, you have Cooperatives Europe, which is representing all cooperatives in Europe, and then you have a sector federation called Rescoop EU, and that's the organization that I'm working for. Yeah, everything clear so far? Yeah, good. Let's move on to the more interesting part of today's presentation, and that is energy cooperatives. Let me first tell you what an energy cooperative is not, because there's a whole lot of things that people, well, a lot of misconceptions about the concept of an energy cooperative. A lot of people, especially DSOs, so those are distribution grid operators or transmission line operators, they think that a cooperative or an energy cooperative is a technical concept. They think that we are microgrids, so that means like energy islands, where people produce and consume energy in a closed system. And therefore, they think that we are encouraging our members to go off-grid, which is not exactly true. I mean, when we look at the variety within our network, we will easily see that we do have, and we do represent some microgrids and some energy islands. But when we look at our members, that's only a very tiny piece of the entire puzzle. So our members are addressing a whole lot of different activities, and microgrids are just a single, very small piece of the entire puzzle. Yeah, but I'll get to that later on. So we're not microgrids. There are some microgrids, but it's not a technical concept. It is a social concept, and that is quite an important thing to consider. What else are we not? We are not restricted to a specific legal form. A lot of people think that a cooperative is a legal form, and in most cases, in most European countries, that is actually true. In most countries, we have the legal form of a cooperative. But in some countries, we don't have that legal form yet. For instance, in Denmark, they don't know anything like the legal form of a cooperative. They have something that is called a log. It's L-A-U-G, and it happens to operate like a cooperative, but it's not a specific legal form, nor, I mean, and they don't call it a cooperative. So it's not restricted to a cooperative, to a legal form. We have cooperatives in our network that don't have the legal status of a cooperative. We have non-profit associations that call themselves a cooperative. We also have limited companies that call themselves a cooperative. It all depends on what the national legislation allows you to do. Yeah? And in some countries, there is no such thing as a legal form of a cooperative. Another thing you need to keep in mind is that an energy cooperative is not just another way of financing energy transition projects. A lot of people think that a cooperative is a crowdfunding scheme. It's a very cheap, now I'm using language that I hear all the time. They often say, well, yeah, we need to find a way to finance the energy transition and we don't happen to have any money, so let's ask citizens and call it a crowdfunding. So energy cooperatives are often misconcepted, or they are often used as a concept of crowdfunding, which is not exactly true. It is a certain way of crowdfunding, but a cooperative wants to do even more. Yeah? Because for us, a cooperative or an energy cooperative is about democratizing our energy system. The energy
Dan, can I ask you something? Would you mind sort of, just because I think often the words crowdfunding, crowd lending are used in all kinds of interchangeable forms. Would you mind to just give us some definitions of both crowdfunding and crowd lending? That'd be really
very good question, and I will address it in a later section today.
Thank you. Brilliant
question here, but I will definitely come back to this.
Right.
So for us, a cooperative is a way to finance energy transition projects, but it's more than that. Yeah, it's for us, it's about democratizing our energy system. I think we all agree that our energy system is currently changing from one that is based on fossil fuels and a very centralized system to something that is decentralized and that is based on renewables. And I think we all realize that as citizens, we will be paying for this energy transition anyhow. We will be paying for it as consumers. We will be paying for it as taxpayers. We will probably pay for it as owners of a bank account, and therefore we will finance projects of big companies. So one of the main messages that we're trying to bring in Europe is we need to democratize our energy system, and we need to make sure that people can actually take ownership of the energy transition. Yeah? It's about making sure that all people have equal access to clean energy at an affordable rate. And it means that if there happens to be profit, if there's profit to be made, it needs to be disclosed with all citizens, not just the ones that happen to have a suitable roof where they can put solar PV panels on, or not just the people who can actually afford paying for a cooperative share. So it's about inclusiveness, it's a social model, and it should help us to address a problem and need that members or people are facing. I think that is the main message that we should bring in Europe. It's not just about financing energy transition projects. A definition of what an energy cooperative is, for us, an energy cooperative is groups of citizens who cooperate on energy transition projects. And energy transition projects, I mean not just electricity, it can be heating, it can be cooling, it can be transportation. The whole range of activities are currently being developed by members of Rescoop EU. When we look back in time, 5 years ago, I think 95% of our members were only involved with production of renewable energy. There were a lot of feed-in tariffs or green certificate systems across Europe. It's a subsidy system which basically gives you a compensation for the fact that you produce renewables. Well, in most European countries, we don't have such thing as feed-in tariffs anymore. Subsidies have gone down, and therefore a whole lot of our members have also changed their activities, and they have started looking into new activities such as supply. So we have members who are operating, who have a supplying license and who also supply energy to their members. We have cooperatives that are dealing with distribution management, so they own their own distribution grid. We have cooperatives working on flexibility. We have cooperatives working on energy savings, district heating, and also car sharing. But there's a whole variety of activities, which while I will get back to this later on, but it's important for you to realize that energy cooperatives are not just producing renewables. No, they're taking on a lot more challenges than just the production of renewables. It also includes heating, it also includes cooling, it includes transportation, and of course electricity, which is by far the most known activity. Yeah. Once again, historic perspective. I think around 1900 we had the electrification of Europe, and back in those days, and even during the medieval times, we had a very decentralized energy production model. We produced energy very close to where the energy was needed. I don't know if you know this place. This is what we call the Mill of Rotselaar. It's a hydropower station based in Belgium, and it's actually the place where the famous cooperative EcoPower was founded. It was founded around the kitchen table in Rotselaar in Belgium, and this is so they are using producing electricity from the river. So it's a hydropower station. And during 1900, it was, or the beginning of the electrification in Belgium, they used this to for public street lights. So they had they used the power that was produced by this hydropower station to light the streets. Yeah? So it basically shows that during 1900s, so around 1900, we actually had a very decentralized model. The same can be said about these famous old wind mills from the Netherlands, which are quite known, I guess. And so, but we produced renewables, and we used renewable energy sources to produce energy, and we consumed the energy very close to the place where it was actually produced. Now, this narrative has changed after the Second World War, when we had something like nuclear plants and gas stations and all the centralized production facilities. Because around 1945, we lived under the assumption that we needed economies of scale, that we needed to make things more efficiently, that we had to decrease the cost of production, and therefore we needed large production facilities that were no way safe, of course, and that also were quite polluting. So that was the narrative around well, it was the narrative until I think the OPEC crisis during the 1970s, that we really had this centralized production. And I think even today, we will see that a whole lot of big utilities still have this old centralized approach in mind when they think of the energy system. But that is now changing once again. So we used to have decentralized, we then went into a centralized production model, and now once again, we see that we are changing the narrative. Even the European Commission is convinced today that we should go back to a much more decentralized model, where we actually can put citizens at the core, and where we are producing renewables, well, renewable energy, so energy from renewable sources, and that we consume the electricity close to where it's being produced. So it's actually a whole swing. It started from decentralized back in the medieval times to centralized, and now once again, we are changing the narrative, and it looks like in the years that will follow, we will have this decentralized production model once again. At least that's what we hope for in Rescoop EU. Historic perspective on energy cooperatives in particular starts around 1900, and I will be using an example from Italy. Around 1900, we had the electrification of Europe, and in this case, Italy. And back in those days, it was often the government who felt responsible for electrifying their own countries. And Eerwerkprat is a very small, it's actually a small village that is not too far from Bolzano. So it's in the Alp region of Italy. And of course, Alps, they increase costs for governments. So the government decided not to electrify that region in the Alps because it was too expensive. So people living in that region realized that if they wanted electricity, it was not going to be provided by the state. So therefore, they decided to set up a cooperative themselves, and they raised funds from citizens who were living in that region, and they basically founded an energy cooperative. So within our network, we have energy cooperatives that have been operational since 1900. They are 100 years old, and we recently visited them, and we were actually surprised to see that I mean, they're very old, but the infrastructure that they have is quite impressive. They are operating smart grids. They have by far the most modern infrastructure you can imagine. So even though they are 100 years old, they have proven themselves as very innovative, and they happen to have the cheapest electricity price in the entire country. So it need for people, because they realized that the government was not going to provide them electricity, that they felt the need to take matters into their own hands, and therefore they set up an energy cooperative. So once again, you see, it's a cooperative. It was during a challenging time. There was a need, and people decided to take matters into their own hands. Let's move on in history, and we're talking 1973. And I'm going to be referring to an example from Denmark. This is the Tvindmølle, and you will see it here. It's the one with, it's quite famous. It looks like the one from Tintin, or like the rocket from Tintin, but it's actually it's a wind turbine, one of the first wind turbines, modern wind turbines in Europe, and it was built by people. It was built by people. They are digging the actual place here. And during the 1970s, Denmark was confronted with the OPEC crisis. A lot of their energy production came from oil, and I think you all know what happened in 1973. The oil price went up. It was way too expensive for people to heat their homes or to produce electricity. And therefore, people started looking at alternative solutions. And this is actually a cooperative that Tvindmøllekraft, say they gathered a bunch of citizens, and they decided to build their own wind turbine by hand. Right now, EcoPower is basically doing the same in Eeklo, because a manufacturer, so the manufacturer of a modern wind turbine went bust last year. They had to order bits and pieces everywhere, and now they are basically replicating this model in Tvind from Denmark. So they are replicating this in Belgium right now, and it's not literally, but people are actually building the wind turbine. But it's like Meccano. So they bought bits and pieces everywhere in Europe, and now they're making this work. So 1973, once again, economic crisis. People had a clear need for something. They found each other, they set up a cooperative, and they started producing renewables. Let's move on in history. 1986, this is a picture. It says, "Ich bin ein Stöfer," which I don't know how many German speakers we have, but "Ich bin ein Stöfer" can actually mean two things. It can mean that you are trouble, you're a rebel, and it also means I'm a nuclear accident. Because in 1986, we had a nuclear accident in Chernobyl, I think you all know. And there was a small village in Germany in the Black Forest called Schönau, which was actually, they felt really bad about what happened in Chernobyl. And they invited the children from Chernobyl to come over to spend their summers in Germany. And this is how they got familiar with energy and with the centralized energy production model. And there was a doctor who felt like he should do something about this. And so what they did in Germany is they set up a referendum, and they wanted to set up a cooperative to replace the utility and to make sure that they could produce their own electricity from renewable energy sources from the region, and that they could use that same electricity in their homes. So they set up a referendum. And this is the campaign poster that they used. They basically used this campaign poster to invite people to vote in favor of replacing the old utility and to set up a cooperative to take matters into their own hands. So once again, there was a clear need for it, and people decided to do something and take matters into their own hands and set up an energy cooperative. This is right now one of the most famous examples of energy cooperatives across Europe, because they also operate their own distribution grid. So they successfully replaced the utility. And right now, I think they supply energy to over 100,000 households in Germany. And they're also a member of Rescoop. And of course, nowadays, we see a whole lot of new initiatives coming up. I think I will get to some numbers in a second, but today, I think we're talking 2010, 2020, we see that there's a clear need for energy communities because a lot of people feel that we need to take action on the climate. A lot of people feel that we need to speed up, we need to accelerate the energy transition, and therefore they want to take matters into their own hands, just as what happened in history, and therefore we see a whole lot of new initiatives coming up. So what you need to know is, just like regular energy cooperatives in general, we see that energy cooperatives, they come and go, but they often come during times when there's an actual need for it. And that is during hard economic times, or when people get struck by a nuclear accident, or when people see the need for accelerating the energy transition. So some words about energy cooperatives today. In 2015, we made an inventory of the existing energy cooperatives. So I'm not sure how accurate these numbers are today. We should actually do that exercise again, but it was it was time consuming. But 5 years ago, we found about 3,500 energy cooperatives operating across Europe. We tried to put them on a map. I hope you can see the map. But you will basically find most energy cooperatives in West and North European countries. It was very hard for us to find energy cooperatives in Central and Eastern Europe. And so we started looking into why it was so challenging for us to find energy cooperatives there. And we found that there are some reasons that can explain this. First thing is that in Central Eastern Europe, the word cooperative is still easily associated with communism. The communist movement had taken over the cooperative movement, and therefore a lot of people still were very anxious and cautious about the word cooperative. So that is definitely something that is a challenge there. So that's also why we now all often use energy communities instead of cooperatives, because it also makes sure that people in those regions understand that this is not just something that is related to communism. Another reason is that there were hardly any support schemes for renewable energy production. As I was saying, in Northwest Europe, we usually had subsidies or green certificate systems or feed-in tariffs that could actually provide a subsidy to people who were producing renewables. That was not the case in Central Eastern Europe. That region was mainly provided with cheap gas from Russia, and therefore there was not really a need for producing renewables. And there was certainly no need for giving people a subsidy for that. And I think a general lack of financial means for people to engage and to get together and to take on energy production projects also explains why it used to be very hard to find energy cooperatives in that region. Now, the good news is that this situation is changing for the better. Right now, we have cooperatives in our network that are operating from Romania. We have a cooperative that is based in Croatia. We see a lot of cooperatives coming from Greece right now. We have one from Slovenia. So slowly but surely, Central Eastern Europe is getting there. And I think with the publication of the Clean Energy Package, which I will get to later on in today's presentation, I think what we will see in Central Eastern Europe is that they will speed up. And I'm pretty confident that within a few years from now, there will be a whole new movement coming from that region. And we already see that happening today. As I was saying, accurate data is missing, especially at the EU level. The 3,500 cooperatives is a number that we've been using for 5 years now. The good news is, though, that at the national level, there's a whole lot of cooperatives that are organizing themselves at the national level, and therefore it's much easier to report numbers. So for instance, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, they publish annual reports where they gather, and they have a big questionnaire that they launch amongst their members. So they have pretty accurate data from certain countries through national reports. Yeah. Very briefly, some words about Rescoop EU. Rescoop EU is, of course, the European Federation representing citizens' energy cooperatives. We're a fairly young federation. We were only founded in 2013, and we were part of a European project where we got together with a bunch of energy cooperatives, and we decided that we actually needed an association that could represent the voice of energy cooperatives in Europe, because that was unexisting. And therefore, that made us decide to set up this European association. Right now, Rescoop EU represents about 1 million European citizens and about 1,500 energy cooperatives. So I would say around half of the European cooperatives, energy cooperatives, are represented in our network. It's not because the others don't want to join us, it's because we haven't had the time yet to reach out to them and to convince them to join Rescoop EU. So that is something that we're working on. Ideally, we can cover all cooperatives in Europe, or energy cooperatives in Europe. Members of Rescoop EU, they can join either directly or indirectly. In some countries, as I was saying, in some countries, the energy cooperatives are organizing themselves quite effectively, like Belgium, Denmark, Spain, France. It's quite easy for them because the movement is quite professional, the movement is quite big, and they managed to organize themselves quite effectively, that they also managed to set up a European or a national umbrella organization that can represent the voice of all national members. So in some cases, these individual cooperatives that are operating on the field don't join Rescoop EU, the European Association, directly. They get represented through a national organization. For instance, in Flanders, we have cooperatives. We have I think about 12 energy cooperatives operating in Flanders, the Dutch-speaking region of Belgium, and they are represented in a national or regional association called Rescoop Flanders, who is a member of Rescoop EU. In other countries, there's hardly any cooperatives yet, and therefore it doesn't make any sense for them to set up this national umbrella organization. So these cooperatives often join Rescoop directly. So it also means that within our network, it's a variety of associations representing a bunch of cooperatives at the local level, but also cooperatives who are operating at the local level directly. The main objectives of Rescoop EU, as I said, was making sure that people's voices and, well, the voice of cooperatives are heard in the energy policy debates. We also try to foster collaboration between energy cooperatives. So we try to write European projects. We make sure that they get in touch with one another. We have a network where if people have questions that they can reach out to us and we can put them in touch with one another. So we try to help them grow and prosper, because sometimes we hear that a cooperative is facing a challenge with something that has already been solved by another cooperative. And it doesn't make any sense for them to reinvent the wheel. It makes more sense for us to put them in touch with somebody who had actually expertise in solving the same problem. So we try to do that in Rescoop EU, and of course we also try to promote the cooperative business model in the energy sector. Some words about energy cooperatives in the future. This is a question we often hear from EU policymakers, and that also made us decide to make a big research around this. And this is a research that was published 2 years ago by CE Delft, it's a research institution from the Netherlands, who actually figured out what the potential was for European prosumership by 2050. And it turns out by 2050, half of the European population could be producing their own electricity. That means they could be producing electricity by putting solar PV panels on top of their homes, or they could join a cooperative, because this is the breakdown. You actually see that cooperatives, so of the 264 million European citizens who could become a prosumer, there's 37% that could become a prosumer by joining a cooperative and by teaming up with a bunch of other people to take ownership of joint production installations. Yeah? So I think it's quite obvious that the potential for energy cooperatives and energy communities in general is, it's quite big. Right? So it means energy cooperatives, energy communities can be the next big thing in Europe. And this has also been acknowledged in what we call the clean energy package. This is something I've already explained to you. This is actually how the energy system is currently changing from one that is based on centralized and large production facilities into very small production facilities and a very decentralized system. So where we produce electricity very close to where we consume it, where we have a distribution system that is based on large power lines to something that is much more flexible, to something that is much more bottom up and not top down, something that empowers people to actually become active prosumers, so producing and consuming electricity at the same time. Whereas right now in the old system, people, citizens, were just seen as consumers, which is something that I think this is a narrative that is changing. And you probably know that the European Commission has recently published a clean energy package, which includes provisions, or it includes provisions for people to become a prosumer in tomorrow's energy system. So basically the main message here is that the system is changing from something big into something that is actually small. So the next big thing, we believe that the next big thing will be a lot of small things. And this is also represented in this campaign poster that we made with Greenpeace. This is also a changing narrative. I think the government used to rely on the market. And so either the government said, we're going to take care of it ourselves, or we're going to ask the market. And now it looks like there's a third party that is part of this playing field, which is actually the citizen. So this is burgerij. It actually means is the citizen. So there's a growing understanding that if the market is failing and the government doesn't have the capacity to take on those challenges, it might be wise and it might be something to consider to look at citizens and how they could actually help to overcome the challenges that we're facing. And so this is a document. It will also appear in this toolbox, which I was referring to. It's already published on the website of Rescoop EU, and it's basically a document that will explain how the clean energy package, so the new European guidelines, will actually provide opportunities for citizens and local authorities, because that is important. It's not only about citizens, it's also providing sufficient opportunities for local authorities, so that includes cities and municipalities, to become much more active in tomorrow's decentralized energy system. I think, yeah, before we wrap up the first part of today's presentation, let me briefly address some of the main benefits of energy cooperatives. First thing you need to know is that energy cooperatives can foster social acceptance for the energy transition. This is actually a picture. I hope you can see the picture. This is a picture that was taken in the city of Eeklo in Belgium. And all the yellow dots, this is actually a city where EcoPower, one of our members, it's a cooperative that has about 60,000, or that represents about 60,000 people who make a joint investment into the cooperative and who is operating large production facilities all over the country. The yellow dots on this picture represent all people that are living in the city of Eeklo and that are a member of EcoPower. So those are the people that are facing the wind turbines that EcoPower owns in this community. All these yellow dots represent people who are actually owning or jointly owning this production facility. So it's actually proven, I mean, there's lots of research that has proven that if people get the chance to participate in a wind farm, they become much more positively oriented to this project than if it's just a commercial company that comes and comes in and that puts down a wind turbine that people have to face all day and that people don't get the chance to participate. So it fosters social acceptance if people get the chance to be part of it and if people can share in the profits. It, of course, keeps individual investments and energy bills affordable. If people can't afford putting solar PV panels on their roof, they can still benefit from the energy transition by buying a share in a cooperative and by joining an energy cooperative and by becoming an active member. Later on, I will explain that some of our members are also able to reduce the energy bill. I will get to that later on, but it is known that, I mean, if we look at our members who have a supplying license, it's not a coincidence that most of our members who are supplying energy are by far the cheapest energy supplier on the market. It's because these cooperatives don't mean to make any profit on their supplying activity. Yeah? They see it as an additional service that they can offer to their members, but they don't want to make, or at least a considerable amount of our members don't want to make any profit on the supply of energy. So that means lower bills for people. Energy cooperatives can also make sure that people can share in the profits. And there's even cooperatives that are using part of their profits to serve the larger community. I will give you plenty of examples later on, but there's a growing number of energy cooperatives that are using part of their profits to benefit the entire community, not just the people who actually bought a share in the cooperative. It also gives people the chance, or communities the chance of remunicipalizing themselves. There's a whole lot of regions in Europe that have suffered from an economic crisis or from, I mean, there's a whole lot of regions in Europe that have lost social contact, and for a lot of people, being part of a cooperative gives them back a sense of community, which is quite important. And research finally has also revealed that cooperatives can retain up to 7 times more value, more money into the local economy than commercial companies would. So I will give you the example of a big commercial company that will come in Ghent and that will put a wind turbine here. It's a company, it's EDF, I don't know if you know it, but it's quite a big utility. It's a French one. It's owned by a few shareholders in France. If they come and they put a wind turbine in Belgium, it's of course great because it's renewable energy. But when you look at their model, it means that it's a few people living in Paris, in France, who are getting the profits of this wind turbine. So this is for us, this is a wrong narrative. We should be able to let people who live close to this wind turbine, we should let these people participate and therefore retain money in the local economy. It doesn't make any sense for a French company to come over and to put a wind turbine into Belgian territory. No, it makes more sense that we mobilize the funds that are available at the local level and that we disclose the profits with the people who are facing this wind turbine on a daily basis. I think those are the main benefits, and I will leave the first part here. If you have any questions, don't mind asking them right now. Otherwise, we will go into the next section, which is activities and business models. And I will seize the opportunity and take some water. Any questions? No? Okay, good. Then I suggest we continue. Activities and business models. As I was saying, there's a whole lot of members of Rescoop EU that have reorganized themselves because feed-in tariffs and green certificate systems and subsidies went down over the years, and they've been looking at other activities. But I think if you look at the 3,500 energy cooperatives that are represented in Rescoop EU, I think the majority, and then we're talking 70%, will be producers of renewable energy. So it's actually pretty straightforward to understand. It's a bunch of citizens, and I'm referring to some of the examples from within our network, but it basically means it's a bunch of citizens who put in money, so they buy shares in a legal entity, in a cooperative, and because they buy these shares, they become a co-owner of this wind turbine. The wind turbine, for instance, or I'm talking about the wind turbine right now because that is by far the most traditional business model, but it can as well be solar PV panels, of course. It can be a hydropower station. It can be a biomass installation, or a cogeneration, I mean. So there's different projects that these people can invest in. They do that by purchasing at least one share in this legal entity, which then owns the production facility, and then the energy is sold to the market. That is by far the most traditional business model that we see amongst energy cooperatives. And then I'm referring to some of the examples here. Those are, for Westmill, for instance, is a cooperative from the UK. So is Baywind. We've got the Windvogel from the Netherlands, Koopstroom operating from Bruges, Zeewind, Netherlands, even Greece. I mean, if you look at the network, I think most of our members will have adopted this business model. So it's people making a joint investment into renewable energy production installations and then selling the energy to the market. That is by far the most traditional model. There's also some energy cooperatives that are not producing renewables, either because the legal framework doesn't allow them to, or because they're not interested in producing renewables. Some of our members are only interested in supplying activities. So they buy electricity on the market. Yeah. They decide from which sources they want to buy electricity from. So in most cases, they have very specific requirements on the actual energy that they buy. Yeah. Some only buy from local farmers, other cooperatives buy from renewable energy sources from within the country, others buy energy from foreign countries. I mean, there's a whole variety of criteria that they can apply to decide where they want to buy the electricity. For instance, Cositer is actually a producer that was set up by a bunch of producers. A bunch of producers operating from the French-speaking region of Belgium. So they were producing renewables, and at a certain point, their members started wondering, well, why don't we use that same electricity in our own homes? Why are we just selling to the market and not selling to our own members? So that made them decide to set up a cooperative supplier, which is called Cositer. So that means people who own a share in one of the producers' cooperatives, they can also join Cositer and therefore buy the electricity at an affordable rate. We also have, for instance, Rescoop, which is quite famous in France. They are buying electricity on the market and they are selling that electricity to their members. Nostra is operating from Italy. We have a Robin Hood Energy from the UK, from Nottingham. They are a non-profit supplier. We have Greenpeace Energy operating from Germany. Copernico, for instance, operating from Portugal. So,
Dan, I have a question. We have some people here from Nottingham. It's actually one of our participants. So Robin Hood is not a cooperative. It's a public. It's an arm's length public company.
Yeah, so it's owned by the council as a company.
It's a public company.
And it operates all around the country as well as a kind of white label operation. So yeah, it's run with a particular set of values, and it's effectively more of a not-for-profit system, but it operates within the existing market of energy suppliers.
Good. Then I'm learning. Good. Thank you.
No problem.
Apart from that, we also have cooperatives that are combining production and supplying activities. And I will use this example, this very understandable scheme, I hope. At the right-hand side, you have a citizen who is purchasing, and in this case, I'm referring to the model of EcoPower, a cooperative from Belgium. So a share costs €250. People buy at least one share to become a member of this cooperative. And the money that comes in this cooperative is then used to invest in renewable production installations. So EcoPower owns, I think, about 25 large wind turbines. They operate a production facility for wood pellets. So they have, let's say, assets, and at the end of the year, well, not at the end of the year, the electricity that is being produced by the renewable energy production installations is sold back to the members at an affordable rate. So it means people who buy at least one share in the cooperative and who become a co-owner of all these installations also get the chance to purchase electricity at an affordable rate. And I'm saying an affordable rate because EcoPower does not want to make any profit on its supplying activity, and therefore it is by far the cheapest energy supplier in the region. Especially for people who don't consume a whole lot of electricity, EcoPower is the cheapest one. Yeah. At the end of the year, if the company is profitable, and then we're mainly talking profitable because of its production activities, they still get a feed-in tariff for some of the energy that they produce. They give back a dividend to their members, so people get a financial revenue on the investment that they made. For some people buy one share, some people buy 50 shares, but I think that's the cap. You can't buy more than 50 shares because EcoPower does not want to have huge or a very large investors. Yeah, and just like any other cooperative, regardless of the amount of shares that you own, you just have one vote at the annual general meeting. The similar model is being put in place by Som Energia. So these are cooperatives that combine production facilities or production activities with supplying activities. And so they are closing the loop. We also happen to have distribution system operators. As I said, for instance, in the Black Forest in Germany, we have this wonderful example called EWS Schönau that is operating its own distribution grid. Yeah? And this is what I was saying, a lot of DSOs, a lot of people in the sector think that energy cooperatives are restricted to energy islands or closed energy systems or like distribution systems. That's not true. So there happen to be some distribution system operators, but certainly not all our members are. We have cooperatives that are also dealing with energy monitoring services. And I'm referring to this wonderful research that was done in the US a few years ago. They went to homes and they asked people to start looking into energy retrofits. And they started by distributing leaflets. And so people found, so it was over a longer period of time, but first people received a leaflet that said, by putting or by insulating your home, you can actually save money. That wasn't really effective. Same with the argument that saving the planet, insulating your home would save the planet. Not effective. Being a good citizen was slightly more effective, but still not as effective as the last leaflet that they distributed, and that's this one. Your neighbors are doing better than you are. That was by far that leaflet triggered way more action, or that created way more support for the campaign than all the other leaflets did. So that also got Energy Idea, a cooperative from Belgium, thinking. And they set up this energy monitoring platform that allows people to monitor how much electricity they are consuming at home. And it also allows you to benchmark yourself against other similar families. So they have this gamification. So that means every month they have this interactive platform where people can benchmark themselves, and the end result is quite significant. There's, I think the EcoPower is using the services of Energy ID, and I think EcoPower is saving, I think over the last 5 years, EcoPower has saved 30%. So that means an average consumer that is a member of EcoPower will consume up to 30% less in 5 years. And one of the main reasons turns out to be the fact that they get more insights into their energy consumption. They benchmark themselves against other people, and therefore they also start consuming less. EcoPower also has a training program where they try to help people to save less, or to save energy. We also have cooperatives that are using big data to to set up interactive invoicing. This is an example from Spain, for instance, where people don't just receive a boring invoice at the end of the month, but they get real life data. So they immediately get feedback on how well they are doing. These interactive data is reflected onto the invoice that people receive. So they immediately see how well they are doing compared to others, but also how well they are doing compared to the same month last year, for instance. So big data is also something that energy cooperatives are looking into. We have cooperatives that are dealing with collective home retrofits. They are setting up collective purchasing schemes for LED. They are setting up collective purchasing schemes for insulation material. This is, for instance, an example from Energent, who is helping people to set up collective home retrofits. And we also have a working group in Rescoop because we see a growing interest amongst our members to look into this and to help people save energy in their private homes. There's a whole lot of cooperatives that are also setting up training programs to help people address energy savings. For instance, there's Generation Zero Watt, one of our members operating from the German-speaking region in Belgium is training school children from primary school. They're training them and they're turning them into energy experts who go back into their families and who help. They do not only save energy in their classrooms, there's a whole company included and everything, but they also try to teach these children to go back home and to basically help their parents to save energy too. Brixton Energy is one of the examples that we refer to from the UK. They are helping socially vulnerable people and they are training them to become energy experts and to save energy, and they develop renewable energy projects at the local level. There's Dr. Watt, for instance, from Intercop. There's many more examples of energy cooperatives that are setting up training programs and helping people to save energy or to become energy experts. We also have cooperatives that are helping local authorities to replace traditional public street lighting by LED. And this is, for instance, a campaign poster from a cooperative that is called Power. It's not too far from Brussels in Belgium. And this is the campaign poster that they used to invite people who are living in that region or in that city to adopt a public street light in front of their door. And so the money that was raised through the cooperative would then be used to replace the traditional street lights by LED and help the city to save energy. This is actually a model of third-party financing, which we will get to later on. We have cooperatives that are dealing with flexibility, demand response. I think you've already visited Buurzame Stroom in Ghent, so I won't elaborate too much on this. But it's important for you to know that there's a growing number of members that are looking into flexibility, storage solutions, how cooperatives can help to take ownership of a local grid and make sure that we maximize production of renewable energy sources and consume that same energy within the same area. So this is actually we're using and testing apps and technology and platforms to facilitate that in a bunch of European projects. We also have cooperatives that are dealing with heating, so not just electricity, also heating. I think, especially in Denmark, there's quite a big number of cooperatives that are using waste heat from, for instance, an old incineration plant, and they're using that heat into a district heating network. So they are heating pipes, which then go into the homes, and that helps people to heat their homes, and therefore it's done in a cooperative way, and it's a lot cheaper. We see the same model now. We see district heating projects in Belgium, but also in the Netherlands, in Denmark, and this is now scattering across Europe. So I think the next big thing for cooperatives, energy cooperatives, will be heating and cooling as well. EcoPower is also, it's a cooperative that does not only produce and supply electricity, they also have a production facility where they produce wood pellets, and people can use these wood pellets to heat their homes. So there's a whole, well, there's a growing community or a growing number of energy cooperatives that are looking into heating as well. There's also transportation. Electric mobility is also gaining a lot of interest within our network, and that actually made us decide to set up a new legal entity, which is called the Mobility Factory. And the Mobility Factory is a cooperative that operates a platform that you can see here. It's a platform that energy cooperatives can use to share electric cars within their communities. We noticed that a growing number of members of Rescoop EU were struggling to set up their own platform, and therefore we decided to do this in a collective way. And now we have this European platform that cooperatives can use to share electric cars in their communities, and they can deal with all the nice stuff like deciding on the logo, the pricing model, where they're gonna put the cars, how many cars they're gonna operate, which cars they would like to buy, and they don't have to deal with the hassle of setting up and running this platform, because that is being facilitated to this European cooperative. So a growing number of members are also looking into electric car sharing. That was the second part. So it just shows you the whole variety of projects and business models that we can see for energy cooperatives. Any questions? No questions? I can't see the chat right now, so I'm not sure.
I think there has been some conversation in the chat, but we have generally, I think, you know, over the last year that we spent together looking at energy communities, we've been looking at quite a lot of business models and examples. So I think it's good to hear it again, but we've already heard it, so we know quite a lot about it already.
Good. Next part will be on financing and ownership models. I hope it won't be too technical. I will guide you through this.
I think technical is good. We have a lot of, we also have a lot of people with quite a lot of knowledge in the finance sector, so don't worry. Okay,
good. So financing and ownership models, and this is quite important, and it's especially important for us. And Britt, I'm now coming to the question that you raised before. Mm-hmm. When we look at, I already told you that cooperative is not just a way of funding a project. For us, a cooperative goes further than that. It's about it's a social concept. It means that people are not just putting their money in and then back off. No, we really want to get something going, and we want to give people a voice in the energy system. But when we look at crowdfunding categories, I think there's three main categories that we can distinguish. First one is inactional donation. That means people can be asked to participate in something and they don't get anything in return. There's no payback and people don't acquire ownership. So for instance, if I want to do a solar PV panel project on top of a local school and I want to set up a fundraising campaign, there's a possibility for me to let people participate in my scheme, and I just ask them to step in, but they don't acquire any ownership and they don't get a payback. Yeah, so they don't expect any payback. It's just some kind of charity, it's a donation. Second model is funding your assets by loans. It means you don't acquire ownership of a project if it's funded by a loan. So it means if I give you a loan, I don't own the project. No, I own a loan. Yeah? It means that at the end of the duration of the loan, it needs to be paid back. And in most cases, it will be considered as a limited risk, and therefore it will have a lower return. I mean, because at the end of the day, if the project goes bust, I still own something that needs to be paid back, and therefore I will get paid back before they actually go to people that own the equity. Another way of funding, or another crowdfunding model, which is traditionally something that we see is very popular with energy cooperatives, is the one where we fund through equity. Yeah? So that means people acquire ownership of a production facility in this case. It means at the end of the day, people are not expecting to get paid back. Yeah? It also means that there's a considerable risk involved, and that the return can be, or would in normal circumstances be higher, especially in a regular company. But in a cooperative, this return is often restricted to 6%. Especially in Belgium, for instance, this is a law. If you have a cooperative, yeah, return on investment, so what you pay on a dividend can't be higher than 6%. So if I buy a share and the share costs 100 euro, I can't get a higher dividend than 6 euro on an annual basis. Yeah. I think if I look in our network, most cooperatives will fund their activities through equity, yeah, or through a combination of equity and loans. We used to have cooperatives that always were that always said, we never fund with loans. We always fund our projects with equity. But at a certain point, they wanted to do a big project, and therefore they also had to use their equity to leverage a higher capacity. And therefore, I mean, suppose what you can do traditionally is, if you have 20% of equity, you can ask a bank, if you have a good project, you can ask a bank to provide you with 80% of loans. So if you really want to do big projects and you can't raise those funds from your citizens, it might be a possibility for you to look into loans. So I think most of our members will be funding their activities through equity, but we see that a lot of members are also starting to look into loans, and they are therefore also lending or blending these, combinations of both. So those are combinations that we see occurring more often. I think the green bonds, where you were referring to, Brits, are situated somewhere here. It's something that you don't expect, well, you expect to be paid back, yeah? It has a limited risk, so it's not equity that you provide, it's not capital that you provide, and it usually has a longer duration and also you get a low return, yeah? If we look at balance sheets, and that is quite important, I'm not sure how familiar you are with accounting rules, but assets is what you traditionally own in a company. And let's use the example of a wind turbine in this case. And then there's different, then on the other side, you have equity or liabilities, and that is something, or that says something about how you will fund your assets. Yeah. And there you have the different options. You have equity or capital, you have loans, and then you have something in between, which is mezzanine financing, but I won't get too technical. And you also have subordinated loans. And the difference is quite important, because as a citizen, there's a certain picking order if your project goes bust. So if your project fails and you need to sell your assets, the order of these is quite significant. If you go bust and you sell your wind turbine, for instance, for 1 million euro, after your employees have been paid, but suppose you don't have any employees, they will first reimburse the people who own a loan before they actually go to subordinated loans. So only if there's a leftover, people who have a subordinated loan will be compensated for what they provided through a loan. Then we will go to mezzanine financing, and it's only at the end of the day, if there's a leftover, that people who own a share will get compensated for what they have provided to the cooperative. Yeah. So this picking order is quite important. Right? It means that if you own a loan and the project goes bust, you will get compensated for what you, there's, let's say, quite a big chance that you will get compensated for what you put in. But if you own a share, there's much more risk involved. It's also called risk capital, yeah? Which is then often compensated by a higher, or justified by a higher return. Yeah. Is this clear? Yeah. What does that mean in practice? It is quite significant, as I was saying, and I will use an example to illustrate that. On the left-hand side, you see a bunch of citizens, and let's assume that these citizens buy a share in what we call a citizens' energy cooperative, in this case, EcoPower. Yeah. That means at the end of the day, the cooperative is raising funds to invest in renewable energy production installations, like in this case, a wind turbine, and people get the chance to buy electricity from the cooperative at the end of the day. Yeah. If the cooperative ends up being profitable, it means that people get a dividend. This is the model that we see is quite traditional in Rescoop EU, and what is important for you to understand is that in this case, it's the people who own a share, it's the people who own the wind turbine, because the wind turbine is owned by this cooperative in which people have bought at least one share. Yeah. Now, what we see in a whole lot of countries is that now that we have a clean energy package with provisions for energy communities, we also see that a whole lot of big companies feel the need to set up their own cooperatives to be sure that they can maintain their activities in the future. They are setting up their own financial schemes, and we don't call them citizens energy cooperatives, we rather call them financial cooperative. In this case, I will be referring to an example from Belgium. A private company, in this case, was Electra Winds. This is a private company, doesn't have anything to do with citizens. It's a big, it used to be a big power or a big energy utility. And this is a cooperative that was owned by Electra Winds. So this is basically something, it's a financial cooperative that was set up by this cooperative. So this cooperative is operating on the market, and they have launched a wonderful campaign, and they are inviting people to join their scheme and to collectively own a wind turbine. So what people do is they buy a share in a financial cooperative. Once again, this is not a citizens energy cooperative, it's a financial model. So people buy a share in a financial cooperative, and what this financial cooperative is doing is providing a subordinated loan to a private company. So they raise funds through this financial cooperative, and they then give the loan to this private company. That means people don't own the wind turbine, they just own a financial product. Because at the end of the day, people can buy the electricity just as in a regular citizens energy cooperative. They can buy the electricity, and they can get an interest on their loan. So the Electra Winds is providing their financial cooperative with an interest on the loan that they receive from this financial cooperative. And at the end of the day, people receive a dividend. A lot of people don't see the difference between this scheme and the scheme that I used to present, that I presented under on the former slide. And the difference is quite significant, because what happened in Belgium, especially in this case, is that at a certain point, Electra Winds, the company here that owns the wind turbine, went bust. So they had to stop operations, and the assets had to be sold on the market, had to be sold, and the leftover was insufficient to pay back the cooperative in this case. So Groenkracht didn't receive any of the revenues that came out of selling this wind turbine. So that also means that these people who own a share, and they believe that they own the share in this wind turbine, they did not. They only owned a share in a financial cooperative who then provided a subordinated loan. So this is a financial model that I think a lot of people ask, do you like this model, or is it something that you don't like? The truth is, we really don't want to encourage people to put their money into something that they don't understand. I think if we want to finance the energy transition, we will need a whole lot of money, and I think we need all kinds of schemes. I think it's just important that people understand that in such a scheme, they don't own a wind turbine. They only own a financial product. And I think as long as these cooperatives make that clear, it's not really a big problem for us, even though they are not represented in our association. It is something that a lot of these private companies have failed to do in the past. So it is quite crucial that they communicate to these people that they don't own part of the wind turbine, which is quite crucial, of course, if things go down, or if things go, if things don't work out that well. Of course, when we distinguish between a financial cooperative and a citizens energy cooperative, the difference is not always that obvious. It's not always that easy to distinguish these two. And I will use an example from the Netherlands. In this case, we're talking about Coöperatie Delta Wind, a cooperative that is operating from Zeeland, not too far from Belgium. And in the Netherlands, it is quite a traditional model to let people join your cooperative. So first of all, these people, they buy a share in the cooperative, just like in any other cooperative. And people can, well, the cooperative owns the wind turbine. People can purchase the electricity from the cooperative that they own themselves. Yeah. In the Netherlands, cooperatives typically have shares worth about €10. So the initial investment that you need to make as a member is quite limited. You have to purchase a share which costs €10, and then you are co-owning the wind turbine. After 1 year, you will receive a request from the cooperative to provide you with a loan. So you're not only a shareholder in that case, you also have, you can also provide them with a loan, which will be much more significant. I mean, the amount will usually be loans up to €250. So you own a share of €10 and then you provide a loan, traditionally €250, on which you get an interest. So this financial cooperative that we've been referring to in Belgium is actually something that is quite traditional in the Netherlands. So it also depends on the country in which you're operating. So that's also why in Rescoop PU, we don't make a very strong statement on these models. It's just important for us that people understand that in this case, it's not just a financial product. They also own part of the wind turbine because they provide a share, which happens to be considerably lower than in other cooperatives. So this is a traditional business model and a way how Dutch cooperatives are setting up their cooperatives. Is that clear? Is it clear what the difference is? Yeah. Another model, and then we're heading to Spain. Is quite similar to the one from the Netherlands. In this case, once again, we have citizens who buy a share in a cooperative. And in this case, in Som Energia, one share costs €250. And then you become a co-owner of the wind turbine. Yeah. But what Som Energia used to do is they bought electricity on the market. And at a certain point, well, in Spain, I think you might know, in Spain, there was no more support for producing renewables. So that also made it very hard for the cooperative to start looking into their own projects. So what they did at a certain point is they set up a new financial scheme. So instead of buying the electricity on the market, they asked their members to buy or to provide a loan to the cooperative so that the cooperative could actually look into their own production facilities and not buy the electricity on the market. So in this case, people have a share in the cooperative, and at the end of the day, just like in the Netherlands, they get invited. It's not they're not obligated. They just get an invitation to join and provide a loan to the cooperative. And typically, if you consume about 2,500 kilowatt hours a year, you are they ask you to buy or to make an investment of about €1,000 so that the cooperative can use that money to produce or to operate renewable energy production installations that can generate sufficient energy to supply or to provide or to cover your own consumption needs. Yeah. So what I mean by this model is just like in EcoPower, it's people who own a share, but then just like in the Netherlands, at the end of the day, they are invited to provide a loan so that the cooperative can operate its own production facilities. This is done through a model that is called generation kilowattora. Yeah. So it's not always that easy to tell what is a financial cooperative and what is a citizens energy cooperative. Sometimes the difference is quite small. Yeah. When it comes down to share offers, we have cooperatives that have what we call an open share offer, like EcoPower. That means people can constantly buy shares in a cooperative, even if there's no projects. People can constantly, well, up to 50 shares, of course, but EcoPower doesn't have any, I mean, they don't limit the fundraising campaign in time. They just have an open capital structure. That means people can anytime buy shares. The money comes in onto the account of EcoPower, and EcoPower makes sure that there's sufficient projects to be invested in. Other cooperatives operating in exactly the same context decide to do it differently, like Beauvais, also a cooperative quite similar to EcoPower, also operating from Flanders. They decided to have or to set up fundraising campaigns for specific projects. That means, for instance, they developed a big solar farm in Flanders. They need €1 million to get it funded. Then they will set up a public or a share offer, and they will, as soon as they raise sufficient funds, they will close it down, and people, after that, people will no longer be able to participate. Yeah. Whereas EcoPower, in EcoPower, people can constantly join and leave if they want. Yeah. So there's that's a different way of dealing with things. This, for instance, is a share offer. I took this from the website of Som Energia, who is looking for €4.6 million by the 30th of June. Yeah, and you see that they already, I think they have 90% of the money was already raised, so they're still looking for the remaining what is it, €300,000 that will be raised from citizens. So Som Energia in this case is applying exactly the same model as Beauvais. So they only raise funds from citizens because they have a specific project. This policy, this project-specific policy for share offers, is something that EcoPower is also looking into right now, because you obviously see that if you don't have sufficient projects to invest in, it's very hard to allow people to buy more shares. If you just have money on your banking account waiting to be invested, it's I mean, you can't make any money out of this. So this EcoPower used to operate in a context where they had way too many projects and way too many funds, and therefore they decided to set it up like this. But they now realize that now there's a time when there's much more competition, situation is much more difficult than it used to be. So they now end up in a situation where there's too many people who buy shares, and the money is waiting on a banking account to be invested, and there's insufficient projects to invest the money in. Yeah. So EcoPower is most likely going to change their policy on this. When it comes down to legal entities and the way they operate several projects. So first of all, when we look at our network, 3,500 energy cooperatives, I think the majority is set up to operate only one project. It's a bunch of citizens who say, well, we want to put solar PV panels on top of a roof of our local school. We will set up a cooperative, and therefore this is our model. I think this is true for the majority of the members of Rescoop EU. But in some countries, or in some cases, we have cooperatives that are operating, or that start with one project, and at the end of the day, who get to a second project and a third project, and at the end of the day, they operate quite a lot of projects. We have cooperative, and once again, I will refer to the example of EcoPower, who just has one legal entity. It's one cooperative, yeah, that operates all the projects. EcoPower has 25 large wind turbines. They have a small hydropower installation. They have about 300 solar PV installations scattered across the country. All these projects are owned by one legal entity. And the legal entity is owned by 60,000 people living across Flanders. So these people buy at least one share in the cooperative. The money that comes in, I think we're talking about €100 million, came in the cooperative and is invested in all these different projects. That means people, these 60,000 people collectively own all the projects at the same time. Another model, and I will use the example from the UK, Energy for All, they went for a completely different approach, and they have one cooperative that is providing services for two specific cooperatives. So what they do in Energy for All is they develop projects at the local level, in this case, and I wanted to show this with a map. So they operate, or they develop projects all over the country, in the UK, and once they have a project and it's ready it's ready to be built, what they then do is they set up a share offer, they set up a new cooperative, they launch a share offer, they allow local people living close to this installation, living close to this project, they allow these people to participate, and once they raise sufficient project or sufficient funds to do the project, they close the share offer, and they have a cooperative that they can provide services to. So this is the model that Energy for All, in this case, is using. So they develop renewable energy projects. At the end of the day, when the project is ready to be launched, they set up a cooperative, they set up a fundraising campaign, they allow people to participate, and as soon as they have sufficient funds, it's a closed entity, and then they can run the project, and Energy for All can then provide services to this, like on accounting, organizing the AGM, making sure that people know what is going on, taking care of the communication and dissemination of the project, these kind of things. So once again, different options. Either you put everything into one legal entity, or you combine, or you set up different legal entities. Once again, EcoPower realized that now they have quite a lot of projects. They realize that sometimes they get who are living close to a very profitable wind turbine, for instance in Ghent, and people say, well, why can't I just own this wind turbine? Why do I also have to own less profitable projects, for instance, in other parts of the country? So this is also something that EcoPower is currently looking into. In some cases, it's just something that you decide on from the very beginning, and at a certain point when you get to do more projects, you have to reconsider and change your policy about this. So EcoPower, I think, has reached that stage where they are questioning this one legal entity approach right now. I will continue on the actual return on investment. I already told you that the most traditional way of getting a return as a citizen is by getting a dividend. It's a financial revenue that you get at the end of the year because the cooperative has turned out profitable. It's something that is being decided at the AGM. And in most cases, especially in Belgium, this dividend will be restricted to 6% of the actual amount that you invested. So in this case, if you invest €100 in a cooperative, it means that at the end of the year, your dividend can't be higher than 6%. It can of course be lower. I think EcoPower has always paid a dividend between 2 and 6%. Yeah, so I think most of the members of Rescoop EU will pay a regular dividend as a so that means it's money that is transferred back to the accounts of the members. Another example that I will refer to is the one, the picture that you see on top. This is a cooperative from Germany in Oberbadendorf, and it's actually a football club that won the championship. And by winning the championship, they have to play in a higher league. And playing in a higher league also that in order to play in a higher league, they also had to build a roof on top of their stands for the fans. That was obliged by German law. And therefore the football club couldn't afford paying for this roof. So what they did is they set up a cooperative with the fans. And so they asked the fans to buy a share in their cooperative, which allowed them to build the roof, of course, and they put solar PV panels on top of that roof just to compensate for this investment. So the dividend that these people, so in this case the football fans, get is either they get a seasonal ticket at the end of the year, or they get a sausage every single time they go and watch a game. So this is a typical way of how a cooperative does not necessarily have to pay a dividend in a doesn't have to be something that people get financially. It can also be something that people just like a sausage. Or in some cases, we have cooperatives that are paying a lower energy price. If you combine renewable energy production with supply, you can say, well, if we turn out to be profitable, then maybe we should not try to make any profit and just charge a lower price to the people who are also purchasing electricity from the cooperative. So it works in two ways. Either you get a dividend at the end of the year, or you decide to lower the price and therefore pay less at the end of each month. So this is also a model that we often see, especially if cooperatives combine production with supplying activities. We also have cooperatives that are charging the same amount to their members and that are helping their members to save energy every month by benchmarking, like I explained, Energy ID, or by helping them to insulate their homes. There's a lot of people who engage themselves to pay the same amount, regardless of the amount of energy that they save at the end of the month. And Energie Solidaire, operating from France, allows you to give the amount of energy that you saved at the end of the month and to give that part to people facing energy poverty and who can't afford paying for the electricity themselves. So it's basically a scheme that allows you to give away the electricity that you saved to somebody who is in need of electricity. It's actually quite an interesting model, and it also is a way of seeing how you can actually use a cooperative to do something that is good for society as a whole. We also have cooperatives that are not paying a dividend at the end of the year, but that are using their profits to pay the wage of a civil servant, for instance, who is helping people to save energy at the local level. We also have a cooperative who decided to use its profits not to pay a dividend, but to build a sustainable concert hall so that people could actually go and watch cultural activities in their community. There's energy cooperatives that decided not to pay a dividend at the end of the year, but he used the profit of their project to get their first pub in the city. The old pub had to close down, and therefore, I mean, people were missing that. And so people decided to use the profit to do something that is good for society as a whole. There's a whole lot of cooperatives, especially in the UK, who are also, setting up a community benefit funds and who are doing something good for the community in which they operate production facilities. We also have cooperatives that are using their profits to take action on energy poverty, but I will explain that in a few minutes. Are there any questions at this stage? I'm a bit cautious of time. Still,
yeah, I'm quite cautious of time, but I think it's, I mean, I don't know if I can get a sort of sense from the room. I think it's getting really interesting. So I wonder if we just want to let Dan continue. Is that, can I just get a sort of sense from everyone? Audible.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. Let's just move on.
Okay. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Financing needs of energy cooperatives. We've been participating in some European projects, and one of the things that we've been trying to do in those projects is that we've been trying to identify the main financing needs of energy cooperatives that are operating within our network. And I will use this example. It's an example from the Netherlands. It's called Windpark Kramer. It's not too far from Belgium, and it's an offshore wind farm that was developed by two small cooperatives, Delta Wind and Zeewind. I already explained you how their model works. First, you can buy a very cheap share, and then after a while, you get invited to provide a loan to this cooperative. But typically, cooperatives in the Netherlands are fairly small compared to the ones in Belgium. In Belgium, we have cooperatives with 65,000 members. In the Netherlands. Each community, I'm exaggerating, but I mean, there's a few hundred cooperatives operating from across the country, and they traditionally have something in between 500 up to 3,000 members. So they are considerably smaller than the ones operating in Belgium or the bigger ones in Europe. Delta Wind and Zeewind, they both have 3,000 members, so they're relatively small, and they managed to develop a 100 megawatt wind farm on a dike in the Netherlands. So it was impossible for them to raise the funds. I think they were looking for about 300 million euro, I think. It was impossible for them to raise those funds from their citizens. by shares or by loans. They couldn't even raise sufficient funds if they included a bank and got a straight loan from a bank. So therefore, they got in touch with Rescoop EU and they said, well, if there's so many cooperatives operating from Europe, why can't we do these kind of big projects and keep it in the hands of citizens? So they got in touch with us. It was the first time we heard about such a big project, so it kind of blew our minds. And eventually we did manage to find a solution for this. And at the end of the day, what they had to do is sell 50% of their project to the manufacturer of the wind turbines, in this case, Enercop. So that means 50% of this project that could have been in the hands of citizens is now in the hands of, well, 50% is in the hands of a commercial company. So that really got us. The first need that we identified was, can we actually consider doing big projects with energy communities that are operating from across Europe? That's the first thing. The second thing is that we often hear from members that they get the chance of buying an existing project that is in the hands of a commercial utility. There's a lot of investors who are operating commercial wind farms, for instance, and that are looking to sell these on the market, and therefore there's a whole lot of opportunities for citizens to buy back an operational wind farm and to give it back to people who are actually living close to this. So this is also a request that we often get in Rescoop is, can't we get something together that allows us to buy a project that is already operational and that is now in the hands of a commercial party? Another request that we often get, and I will start by this example here. This is Boa Energia, a cooperative operating in Portugal. And a few years ago, we got a request in Rescoop. And they said, well, what happens traditionally with starting energy communities is that it's very hard to raise sufficient funds to get the project going as long as the project isn't there. It's often more tempting for people to join a project once they can actually see the project and once they can actually see a wind turbine, for instance, or see solar PV panels. That is the point where people start to get interested and decide to join. But of course, at a certain point, if you're a starter, you really need those funds to get your project going and to give it sufficient visibility within your community. So we got a request from Boa Energia, who was starting back then, and they were in need of seed capital. So we launched a call amongst our members and we asked some of our members, so in this case it was Beauvais from Belgium and Somme Energia, who provided them with a loan which was sufficient for them to start their first project, to set up a communication campaign and to raise sufficient funds from local citizens. And at the point where sufficient funds from local citizens were raised, the loan was paid back to these cooperatives. So this is actually a way of how cooperatives operating in a completely different country can help each other out. A similar model has been put in place between EcoPower and Enercop from France. Enercop, a few years ago, used to be actually a very small cooperative, starting one. And what happens in France is, if you are a starter and if you want to buy electricity on the market, you need to have a guarantee. You need to be able to provide EDF, which still has the monopoly of selling electricity on the market. You have to give them a guarantee that they will get paid for the amount of electricity that you would like to buy. And of course, because Enercop back then was a starting cooperative, they didn't have any financial means, and they couldn't convince a bank to provide them with that guarantee. So they knocked on the door of EcoPower, who was slightly bigger than Enercop back then, and EcoPower provided them with a guarantee. It was basically just a document that said that if Enercop would not be able to raise sufficient funds from local citizens in France, that EcoPower would pay. So that allowed Enercop to actually buy the electricity on the market from EDF and to get started, because that was the point where they started getting visibility in France. they started issuing shares and people could actually join their project. So providing seed capital is actually quite an important need that we see amongst our members. So to overcome these needs, we decided to set up a new legal entity that is called Rescoop Mesize. And Rescoop Mesize at this stage is a European cooperative that is owned by 6 large energy cooperatives from across Europe and Rescoop EU, so the European Federation. And so what we aim to do with this cooperative is we aim to address these needs. So for instance, right now we are looking, last year we actually looked into buying a big utility and give it back to the citizens in the Netherlands. We're right now looking into offshore wind projects. An offshore wind project right now it's impossible to do for a small cooperative, but of course, if you combine the financial means of large cooperatives operating across Europe, there's actually a possibility to do these big projects. And there's a growing need for emerging and starting energy communities to provide them with financing solutions like seed capital, loans, mezzanine financing. These kind of financial solutions are something that we're looking into with Rescoop Mesize right now. Finally, I will continue to be sure that we can finish on time. Collaborations with local authorities, and I think that might be an interesting part for you. I won't go too much into sustainable development goals. I hope you've already heard of these. It's the United Nations who has published 17 goals that we should aim for by 2030. Most significant ones for us are the affordable and clean energy for all and sustainable cities and communities. I hope many of you have already signed up for the Covenant of Mayors, which is an international network. And one of the evaluations of our recent evaluation showed that a lot of local authorities reported that they have a lack of expertise on energy transition projects, that they have insufficient funds to accelerate the transition at the local level. They reported back capacity constraints, that they had a whole lot of other things to deal with and not energy transition projects, and that there was insufficient support amongst their members for renewable energy projects. So this is what got us thinking. And one of the main things that we have to remember from the clean energy package, and this clean energy package includes new regulations at the EU level, which will now have to be transposed in each EU member state. And one of the things that we already see is that there's growing support, not only at the EU level, but also at lower levels. So that means local level in Belgium, provincial level Belgium, regional level Belgium, but also in other countries, we see that there's growing support for citizen participation in the energy transition. And with the clean energy package, it's going to be possible for citizens and local authorities to set up or to team up and set up what we call energy communities. It's legal entities that can be owned by citizens and or SMEs and or local authorities. So that means cities and municipalities, and that will allow them to make joint investments in renewables and benefit from what we call a bike lane. There's different ways local authorities can engage in the energy sector, and the way they've been engaging in the past is public ownership. We still see a whole lot of energy or local authorities that say, well, citizens are already represented in the energy sector because we operate what we call Stadtwerke, for instance, in Germany. It's publicly owned utilities, and they say, well, there's no need for citizen participation because citizens are automatically represented through this public scheme. It's true, but still we like to see something that is more private, that is more in the hands of citizens, where people get an equal say and actually participate in the energy transition. Of course, there's private models. We have the commercial ones, we have the ones for cooperatives, but the ones that are particularly interesting to look into and that will be appearing more often in the future are public-private partnerships. And I will give you 2 examples. First one is a model from EcoPower once again. It's a model that I've been referring to quite often because they are so innovative and because I know them quite well. But EcoPower is currently setting up a new legal entity. It's an SPV, and I'm using this red line on the slide to indicate that this wind turbine, which you will find in the middle, will be jointly owned by 3 legal entities. It will be owned by 2 cooperatives, in this case, EcoPower and a local cooperative, Volterra. And 30% of the project will be owned by the city of Eeklo. So the city itself will jointly own a wind project on their own territories. And what is particular about Eeklo is that it's quite a poor region. It's quite a poor city, and a lot of people are facing energy poverty. And one of the things that we often hear with cooperatives is that they are good for people who can afford buying a share. But people who are facing energy poverty don't have the financial means to buy that share. So through this model, we're hoping to find a solution to this. So as I said, this is going to be a new legal entity. It's what we call a special purpose vehicle, which will own a wind turbine. And the share of Eeklo, so 30% of this wind turbine, will be transformed into public public shares. What we're going to do with this is it's public social shares, we will call it. And it's the city of Eeklo who will transform these shares and give them to people who are facing energy poverty and who can't afford buying the share themselves. So these people don't have to buy a share in the cooperative because the city has already paid for that. So they will jointly own the production facility, just like any other member, and they will also benefit from the electricity that is being produced there. The main benefit for the citizens in this case is that they will be provided with the cheapest electricity on the market. And once they get dropped on the market right now because they can't pay their energy bill, they often end up with the most expensive one. So they will get ownership of a wind turbine that in their own community, but they will also benefit from the fact that they will get the cheapest electricity on the market, and they don't have to pay for the share because the city already paid for that. Another model that we're currently putting in,
just very quickly, guys, can I just hear from people, do we have your permission to run over by Dan? How much time do you need?
I think I need 2 more minutes.
Okay, do we have permission to run over, let's say, by 10 minutes so that we can close and at least allow for some questions? Does anybody have to run off now? Okay, Dan, move on.
2 more minutes, I promise. Once again, another scheme, German-speaking region of Belgium, and in this case, once again, is going to be a cooperative that it's a cooperative wind turbine, so it's 2 cooperatives, EcoPower and Courander, a local cooperative from the German-speaking region, that have jointly developed a project and that are disclosing 50% of their project to 2 cities. So once again, they're setting up what we call an energy community in which citizens and local authorities will be represented, and they will jointly own a production facilities. That also means that the city will own the production facility and also share in the profits of this wind turbine. So this is actually public-private ownership models and special purpose vehicles that we're currently experimenting with. And through the clean energy package, it looks like these models will get more traditional in the future. So these are actually brand new models. There's lots of other ways how local authorities can team up with local authorities. I won't go too much into those. It's great examples, but I won't bother you with that. What can local authorities do? That is quite an important issue. And we're getting to the end of the presentation now. I think local authorities, so that means cities, municipalities, they can join Rescoop and become part of a larger movement. They can benefit from the experience that we have, the examples that we can give. We can put you in touch with people who have already overcome certain problems, or we can put you in people who know these models quite well. It's important for you to recognize the role of energy cooperatives in tomorrow's energy system, give visibility to cooperatives, and emphasize its benefits. There's great examples available in our network of cooperatives who are giving visibility. Always referring to the example in Ghent, where the city gives great visibility to the cooperative projects happening around. It's important for you to consider citizen participation in cooperatives in public tenders. Once again, we have great examples of how you can do that. We can once again put you in touch with the right people. It's important for you to facilitate the logistics for starters, like their first meeting, provide them with coffee, provide them with a meeting, provide them with anything you can do to help energies or energy communities, emerging energy communities, to operate business or to set up a business. Get in touch with them. You can either set up an energy community like the models I've been referring to. One of the recommendations that we often give is set up a secretariat at the local level that people can reach out to in case they want to set up and operate an energy community, or if they are interested in energy transition projects, if they want to refurbish their private homes, give them a help desk or something. Once again, Ghent has put something in place, or provide them with subsidies like a burgerbudget, where people can apply for money to accelerate projects at the local level. I will leave it there. I hope that was more or less interesting. If you have any questions, don't mind asking them now or at the end, or send me an email. You will find my email address here.